Hello, my name's Adam Nightingale and I work for the National Civil War Centre's Learning Department. And in my capacity as a learning and participation assistant, I am called on to tell stories. In fact, I am a professional storyteller. And this can take the form of just writing and delivering tours of school children around Newark. Outside of my work environment, I'll appear in sort of poetry clubs and tell stories. I perform with a band called the Fighting Nightingales that mix sort of spoken word and music. So basically, I tell stories in all sorts of different formats. Now, one of the common denominators, because I've worked in museums on and off, I think for about 15 years now, is history stories. I tell an awful lot of history stories. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my top 10 tips for historic storytelling. And I'm going to break this into two sections, two videos. The first 5 tips are going to be to do with the writing of a story, and the second 5 tips are going to be to do with the performing of a story. And then I'm going to perform a story to you. So tip number 1, find a piece of history you're passionate about. It could be an event, it can be a character. But what I would suggest is pick something that hasn't been sort of done to death in a thousand other poems, films, or plays. This is the example that we're going to use today. Just let me just, there we go. Can you see this gentleman here? This is a gentleman called Geoffrey Hudson, and he was part of the entourage, the court of Queen Henrietta Maria of France, the wife of Charles I. And he was a court dwarf, and he was he had a very dramatic life, and we're going to dramatise that in story form. So that would be my character of choice. One of the reasons I've chosen him is because no one else has done anything about him as far as I'm aware. No one's made a film about him, written a book about him. So he's ripe for pillaging for storytelling purposes. So you'll have your equivalent there. So pick a character, an event, a period of history, and it's better if it's something that sort of hasn't been done to death. Point number 2, research your material, do your homework. And that sounds obvious, but the important thing to say about research is you will do more research than you will need for your story. Do not feel that you need to include all of your research in your story. And also, research can take you off in interesting tangents. You can have a fixed idea in your mind about where your story is going to go, and then you can find a little nugget of information that can sort of steer you off in a completely different direction. So do your homework, do your research. Thirdly, and this is very important, when you sit down to write, don't wait for inspiration. Don't wait for the muse to descend upon you. It really annoys me when people say, I'm just waiting for the muse to descend upon me, because the muse doesn't exist. Inspiration can come, but it comes very infrequently, and you'll just be sitting around bored, and you'll probably abandon it. Just treat it like a job. Sit down, get to work, start writing. What you write will initially be rubbish, but then just rip it up, delete it, however you write, start again, and then eventually something good will emerge. Now, point number 4, and this is going to sound very airy-fairy and hippy-dippy, but writing has a rhythm. It's not just a block of information. So as you're writing and ignoring inspiration, be aware that everyone has their own sort of, writing's very musical. And I often read bits of writing and they're just blocks of information. And you need to sort of find the rhythm in the piece of writing. And you'll know it when you find it. And I'm not going to dwell too much on that because it's a little bit mystical, and you'll either click into it or you won't. So, the fifth and final point in the first part of the section is, once you've written something, rewrite it. Never be satisfied with your first draft. It's probably rubbish, but there's probably something good in there. And if you sit down and just tweak and fine tune and it sounds boring. When I first started writing and I heard Stephen King say writing is rewriting, I thought that sounds like the choresome bit, the boring bit of the process, but it's not. It is actually the most enjoyable bit. Once you've got it all on paper and you're kind of satisfied with the overall shape of it, tweak, fine tune, see it take shape, and it is wonderful when that happens. So that's my 5 tips about writing, I think we are ready now to move on to the performing of the piece that you have written.